You're listening to the Dr. Claude Kershner Show. My name is Dr. Claude Kershner, and we are here to serve organizational leaders and agile teams who strive for excellence and differentiation. I hope you enjoy the content. If you have any questions or would like some additional resources, please visit our website at www.archconsults.com. Enjoy.
We put together this episode for people who are first-time managers or who have been in their managerial roles for quite some time, but still are struggling with the fundamental questions like what is management, what is a manager, and what are some of the key roles that I need to play as a manager to be most effective as a leader, as a planner, as an organizer, and as a controller. And also, one thing that I really enjoy about this particular podcast is we look back into history and we see, where did this thing called management come from and why is it important? Because there seems to be a trend nowadays where organizations are discrediting the need for some level of hierarchical structure, which can we can make a case for that, but at the end of the day, there still has to be a buck stops here, a person that really takes accountability and ownership in a democratic way at times over what happens in that organization and steps up to the plate and doesn't abdicate the responsibility of leadership and management. So here we go. Hope you enjoy.
First line managers are still managers, and it's so important to apply whether you're the CEO of the company or you're the shift manager. These subjects will resonate because they have to still have those decisional skills, the interpersonal skills. They have to have the informational skills in order to be effective as managers. This is an orchestra. The analogy that I'm hoping to paint is that this man right here is the conductor of the orchestra, and the conductor for this reference would be the manager. And what this conductor has under his leadership as a manager is he has something called resources. So the resources that are under his leadership include all of these people. If we're talking about this conductor and we're talking about the orchestra, the question was, if all of these humans, all of these people are one resource that the conductor has under his management, what are some other resources that you can name that this conductor has under his management? So you have the building, which would be the facility. You have the materials or the tools, which would be the instruments. And then you have the people, so that's the human resource. And what are some other resources that he might have that you can't really see? And those resources might start with a mo and end with a ni. Financial resources that are supporting his salary, that are probably paying for some of the other people in the orchestra, and that are funding the project. So the assumption is that this conductor is the manager, to kind of lay this home. And he has a slew of resources under his management, and he likely has a goal. And one of his goals would be to put on a show or to potentially make some money for the company in which he's working for. And in order to do that, he needs resources. So again, you got the people, you got some money, you got the building, you got the instruments, which would be the tools. And then the manager is pretty much left to create a strategy, so create a plan on how he's going to put on a show. And I like this analogy because if you've ever played instruments or you've ever seen a orchestra play, how they play, how this conductor leads and how this conductor manages could be completely different than how any other conductor or any other leader manages, because he could utilize his resources differently. So if you see the way that they're sitting, a different conductor could say, hey, I want my cello people over here and my violin people over here. Or if you can see how this is staged or there's a stacking system to it, he could say, I'd rather have a flat stage. I don't want the stacking system. Or if you can see this big drum guy back here, sometimes people in orchestras like to keep their drummers off the stage. So it really is a matter of how you structure the resources or how you put the resources together in a unique combination to achieve a goal. What's your prior knowledge about management? Keeping people on track. How about just the word manage? Know how the subject matter that we're going to learn throughout the next 4 weeks can be applied to almost every single thing we do. That's a managerial task to say, okay, I'm attending school up in Jacksonville. and there's something that I want to do differently. There's a change that I want to make. So if you think about that process of change and say, okay, well, who do I need to call? What do I need to do? What kind of resources do I need to have in order to make this change? And you mentioned that you don't have a car, right? That would be called a constraint. So you're sort of managing your time. So going back to the definition of management, management is a series of things called planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. All of those four things with management can each be done slightly differently. I'll just sort of introduce my background a little bit and tell you why management is important to me and some of the things that I've learned in my life that you can use hopefully in your career with management. The study of management is really about studying the most effective and the most efficient way to achieve organizational goals. And that might be a lot there, but the words effective and efficient. So if you can picture a person kicking a soccer ball, if you effectively kick the ball, it means that you've achieved the objective in kicking it. So you're proud of the kick either went in the goal or the kick went in the direction in which you wanted it to go. But if you ineffectively kicked it, you could have kicked it out of bounds, or you could have tipped off the side of your foot. You attempted to kick it, but you didn't kick it effectively. So that's kind of a way to visualize what effectiveness means when you talk about doing something. And the word efficiency is an interesting one too. Have you heard of this word before? So you have a car, and say it's a truck, actually, it's a monster truck, and you have a gallon of gas. How efficient is that truck in getting you from Jacksonville to West Palm Beach? So you have 1 gallon of gas, so you have limited resources, right? And the monster truck consumes a lot of gas. So if you compare that efficiency of the monster truck driving from Jacksonville to West Palm Beach, and then you think about, we'll say, a Honda Accord, and you have the same amount of gas, would the Honda Accord be more efficient in getting you a further distance? Would you be able to efficiently use that gas better? So if I had $10 and I have two options with my $10, I have to feed 5 people. Would it make sense for me to go to a gourmet restaurant where they have escargot and amazing food, or would it make more sense for me to go to Pollo Tropical with that $10? Which would be more efficient, an efficient use of that $10 to feed 10 people? Pollo Tropical. If our goal as managers is to effectively achieve the organizational goals, the combination of achieving organizational goals effectively and efficiently means that we're achieving them, but we're achieving them with less resources. So we're trying to achieve the goals with the least amount of resources possible. That's effective and efficient. Management is about planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. And the process of management is all intended to achieve organizational objectives or goals and doing it as effectively and as efficiently as possible. We have this gentleman here conducting the orchestra. If he was able to effectively and efficiently put on an unbelievable show where every single person in that audience after the show stood up and gave him a huge round of applause, he would have done a good job as a manager. But if he was able to achieve the same show with a huge round of applause, but he used $1 million more than the previous guy, he would be less efficient. But if he put on the show, the people in the audience didn't really clap, and it was an okay orchestra, and they're happy, but they're probably not going to come back to another one, he would have maybe have efficiently used his resources to achieve the goal of putting on a show, but he wouldn't have done it as effectively. This is just to kind of show you a little bit of what we're going to talk about. How can you become an effective and efficient manager of your objectives in your schoolwork, in your social circles, at your house, as a daughter? You mentioned that you have your mom there with you. How can you do the things that you want to do in life, the goals or objectives that you have set out, and do it effectively, meaning meet those goals, and do it efficiently? I will be hopefully at graduation clapping and saying, great job, congratulations on graduating, here's your bachelor's degree, and you're going to do it. And you're going to get this amazing degree, and you will effectively have accomplished your goal. So the question is, are you going to do it efficiently? Are you going to spend a bunch of money on the weekends out with your friends? Are you going to try to get some scholarship money, or are you just going to ask mom for more money, and you spend, say, like $80,000 a year on your degree versus $40,000 a year? So here's a fun question, and I can keep going with this example, but if your mom said, hey, listen, you got a budget of say $40,000. You can do whatever you want with this money. And anything that's left over after your degree, you can keep. How that is called an incentive, and how much better would you do at a job of effectively, obviously getting a degree, but how much more efficient would you be? So we'll talk about some of those incentives that as managers we can sort of do for the people that we lead or the people in our business so that they are more incentivized to do the things that we want them to do. When I was a junior in college, I picked up a textbook, and it was a personality psychology textbook. And it changed my life because I actually enjoyed some of the content that was in it. And I was in a fraternity in college and I played football, and I went over to the library often on my own accord, not because I needed to study. I wanted to read this textbook. So I devoured the material. And from the moment I did that, from my junior year of college on, every single time a professor assigned a textbook, I actually gave it a shot. For like the economics textbooks were a little bit more difficult to read, and if you're a finance major, you might not be able to read intro to finance textbooks or financial accounting. It's a little bit different, so it's not as good of reading material. But management material is so fun to read because there's stories, and the stories we can apply them to our lives, and we can see how business works psychologically. So it's sort of like an art and a science. My business experience, just briefly, I've been in business pretty much my whole life. I studied marketing in college, and I also studied psychology in college, and I got a real estate minor. This is in undergrad. I went to Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. And after college, I worked in commercial real estate for a company called CB Richard Ellis for 3 years. And then after that, I went back to school, and I got a master's of business administration with a concentration in entrepreneurship. And then after I graduated from that program, I started a business, and I started working with my family company, and we grew. I worked in my family company for about 12 years, and we grew it based on some of these management practices that we're going to talk about in this class. We grew it from about 40 staff members to about 100 staff members in about 10 years. We went from about 4 million in sales to 12 million in sales. We sold it, and I partnered with a private equity company. So I'm still a business owner, and I became an adjunct professor along with it because I just love teaching. I love this content. I love helping other people learn about business. And sort of that's my story, and that's a little bit about me. So management is very case structured. The case is going to be about Google, and it's about the culture of the people at Google because they have really smart people at Google. What's happening is they're allowing the smart people at Google to dialogue with one another, and it's getting nasty, meaning they're talking about politics, and they're talking about gender equality, and they're talking about really tough issues, and they're starting to bully each other. But of course, at Google, they want people to get into a conversation, and they want people to get to know each other, and they certainly want people to do something called iron sharpens iron to make each other better. But unfortunately, it's going in the wrong direction. So that's sort of what the case is about. And like, for instance, if you were to reference how a manager could come in and use their resources and maybe planning, organizing, leading, and controlling, and how they could lead in order to help this situation, if you use things like resources, manager, and leading, similar to that. That was a pretty easy one that I just gave you, but you understand. Describe the decision-making process and how managers use this process for planning. Discuss how management has evolved in the 21st century. That's a fun one. Apply human resource management, including employee motivation techniques. That's actually my favorite one. Describe the characteristics of an effective leader. My second favorite one, because it's deeply behavioral. You're essentially trying to get people to do things that they may not want to do. You're trying to motivate people, and managers have to do some of that. You, the football coach or something like that, say like, tell me about your most difficult player and why is this player so difficult for you, and how are you managing them? If I was a medical doctor, I would say, there's no chance I'm going to lose any patients. And this is the subject that has brought us together. And the question about management is, what are we managing and why? So organizations, the definition of an organization is really people that are getting together in order to collaborate in a structured format to achieve certain goals. So if you think about organizations, I mean, an NFL football team that you might enjoy is an organization. Even your family unit is sort of an organization in some sense. There's probably some structure to it. If you're like my family, my wife, absolutely has to have structure. We have our own little set of agendas and goals each and every day, every week. We actually talk, because we have 3 kids, we talk on Sunday night about some of our objectives for the week. And I know it might sound corny, but a lot of times because we're running at such high speeds, we need to make sure that we're aware of certain things. So I'll ask her, hey, what are some important dates this week that you're doing? And these are some things that I'm doing this week. So we're essentially managing our family. And managers, so that's what an organization is. And managers are people responsible for supervising the use of an organization's resources to meet its goals. So a manager is just a person that helps use resources to achieve an objective. And a manager is a person who walks through the management process of planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. So next time you're with a group of people and they're coming up with a plan for the weekend, you can say, okay, that's planning. And then when a person says they have a vision for the weekend, they say, hey, actually, I'm really looking forward to this, and I think we should invite more people, and I think this weekend is going to be epic. That's leading, because they're inspiring people to attend their plan. When you start seeing these things in action as we discuss them, you'll start being able to say, oh, that's what that is. And you'll be surprised how planning, organizing, leading, and controlling is all over the place. One of the things I wanted to kind of move towards is why study management. And what's fun about what's happening nowadays in organizations is they're starting to become more self-managed, because there's a issue with the hierarchy, and sometimes we're moving away from these typical ways of managing, which is scientific management and industrial type of management, and we're moving more towards self-organized teams. So there really is a question in academic research saying, do we even need managers? Let me just ask for a second. Why do we need managers? Like, why not just have people manage themselves? Yeah, so people are vigilantes. They're sort of all over the place. And if they're crazy and you can't control them, why don't you just fire them? Who fires them if there's no manager? Typically in an environment where there's no managers, what happens is that the consensus of the team, have you ever watched a show like Voted Off the Island or Survivor or something like that, where they actually vote people off? That's something similar to what would happen if there was no manager, that the team would make a consensus decision to say, okay, we no longer want you here. So there are workarounds to not having managers, and that's just an interesting thing to study. Okay, so why study management? Individuals generally learn through personal experiences or the experiences of others. By studying management in school, you're exposing yourself to the lessons others have learned. What does that mean? It means that you're looking at other people's situations when you study management, cases, problems, mistakes, failures, successes that have already happened. So we get an opportunity to look at those, and we get an opportunity to learn from those. Second one is the economic benefits of becoming a good manager are also impressive. If you're looking to make money, I know you said you're trying to get into finance, which is without a doubt a helpful business vocation, and part of my career has been in finance as well. Finance, like CFOs, are great managers. They typically, when they understand the objective nature of the business, they're also able to understand, if they have the interpersonal skills, which we'll talk about, then they're capable of understanding the big picture. The numbers are very important, and the finances are good. And really what this is saying is that you can make good money if you work as a manager, good money. Learning, and also you can work in many different contexts. You can manage a toilet paper company, or you can manage in biofuel or biochemistry or robotics. I mean, you can manage any kind of industry you want to manage if you understand the premise and the skill sets for managing. There's more, obviously, but those are just some to kind of give you a flavor of why are we studying this? Why am I spending all this time with this crazy guy from Pennsylvania that moved down to Miami and loves business and is, teaching us online in this one-on-one format? It's because this can do great things in your career. This is a subject that I think you're going to reflect back on for a long time, especially if you're working in business. And I know that when I went through when I went through undergrad, I remember my management class. It had a lot of applicable things. So we talked about this process of planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. If you think about planning, everyone says if you don't have a plan, you plan to fail, or the end is determined in the beginning. So a plan is very important. And to just break it down, a plan is basically, hey, what are our goals? And then what's our strategy to achieve our goals? What are we doing? Like, do we want to make more money? Is that why we're studying management? Do we want to get a degree? Is that why we're studying management? Do we want to do remote learning for the first time? Is that why we're studying? So what are those goals? And then of course, what is the strategy? And a strategy, I won't get into the intricate detail of strategy, but strategy is really the means in which we're going to deploy resources in order to achieve our goals. So what's so cool, and there's some great books like The Art of War, and if you think about chess, the game of chess, if you ever played chess, that everybody has the same pieces in chess. But the reason why certain people are so much better than others is because they deploy different strategies. So strategy matters. And without a strategy, there's not a good chance that you're going to win the fight of the war or you're going to get your goals. So that's kind of where strategy comes in. We'll have plenty of time to talk about that later. But just if you think about, say, war movies, or if you think about chess, that's sort of what strategy is. You make a plan to achieve your goals, and the strategy is how you deploy those resources. Organizing is, so if you're thinking about putting things in order, an organization or the organizing process of management is saying, okay, let's look back to that conductor example. I have these violinists. Do I want these violinists to report to the lead violinist, or do I want the violinist to report to this other person? Like, how do we organize those violinists so that they are the best, the most effective for the team? And then you look at the cello people and you say, well, where do I put the cello people? And then you look at the way in which the band plays together and say, how does this, do I have them sit over here? Do I have them sit over here? So it's putting things in order, and it's also creating a structure that makes sense in order to facilitate the work that the company needs to do. And I've probably over-articulated that. How are we putting things in place so that we can achieve our goals most effectively? Structure is a big part of that. When we talk about organizations, say organizations, one of the reasons why they're called organizations is because there's some structure to it. If you think about a building and you think about the structure of a building, the building, you can't have a tent or a teepee in the middle of a city because it just doesn't have enough structure to it. So organizing builds structure, it builds formidability, it builds something that makes sense in order to take it to the next level. Leading is a great one. The best way that you can describe leading is really nothing happens without leadership. And what I'm trying to do, or attempting to do, certainly right now, is trying to encourage you and inspire you to keep going, to apply yourself, and to do a really good job. And how I do that, how I lead you, is I'm giving you a vision. I'm giving you a vision of yourself becoming an amazing manager, becoming a finance expert. I'm giving you a vision of you holding your bachelor's degree, walking down that aisle, and just growing as a manager and as a leader. And when I say those things, that's helping you you see a vision that I see in my head and inspiring you to achieve the goals. So leading is a very important topic when it comes to management. Every manager is also a leader. There's certainly a difference between managing and leading, but all managers are also leaders. And then controlling, the last part of that, the best way to describe controlling is that if you go to a baseball game, and I'd ask if you've ever been to a baseball game, but I think you can get the analogy. If you go to a baseball game and you see the scoreboard tells you information about what's happening in the game. So if you walked into a game in the fifth inning, you would easily be able to be caught up by looking at the scoreboard and seeing what's happening. So that's sort of a monitoring way of, in management, you want to have a scoreboard. You want to understand, how are these goals being met? Are these goals being met? Do we need to readjust our plan? Do we need to go back and do something different? Do we need to incentivize people different? Do we need to help them figure out a way to achieve their goals better? And that's controlling. It's managers monitor performance of individuals, departments, and the organization as a whole to determine if they are meeting performance standards. That's controlling. And there's a lot that goes into controlling, and a part of the controlling, when you asked about motivation, that sort of falls into the controlling element. It's sort of the leading and controlling element of management, and it's a fun conversation to have. When we think about the roles of management, that I think about often when I'm out on the streets hanging out with my buddies and my friends, but there are really three roles that a manager has. They are decisional, and then you have interpersonal, and then you have informational. What does a decisional role mean? How about interpersonal? If you had a bunch of people that you're leading, interpersonal is, well, how well do you work with them? How well do you communicate with them? How well do you talk to them? So that's sort of a novice way to explain interpersonal. How about informational with managerial roles? Why would a manager need to play an informational role? Like, is information important for managers? So the informational role is really about collecting this information, disseminating it, meaning like trying to understand it, and then transitioning that information that we just understood onto other people. So that's sort of how we manage that information that we receive and how we give that information to others. And you sort of said that, you said, hey, communicate with other people and that kind of stuff, but that's the interpersonal. But the goal is to communicate the right information, to get the right information, to disseminate the right information, and then to convey it. So that's really the informational role. Okay, so the decisional role, it actually breaks down into these specific roles. And when you make decisions, you're acting as an entrepreneur, a disturbance handler, which the disturbance handler is kind of fun. That's when if something bad was to happen within an organization, or someone maybe didn't show up to work that was supposed to show up to work for a couple of days, the manager really handles that disturbance. The manager gets calls and saying, hey, something's wrong. And when something's wrong, a lot of times people are alerting the manager that something's wrong because they want the manager to make a decision. So that's a decisional, that's a specific role within the decisional framework. And then you have the resource allocator. If you think back to our example with the conductor, you say, okay, how much money are we going to spend on salaries for the violinist? How much money are we going to spend for the pianist? How much money are we going to spend for the cello players? Like, they're basically allocating resources, which in that case would be financial resources. And that's a role that they're making decisions on in the decisional role. And then, of course, the negotiator role, that's a straightforward one, is that when managers are in a position of management, they have opportunities to negotiate salaries. They have opportunities to negotiate contracts with other suppliers or other vendors. And that's really a role within the decisional roles. You're going to negotiate things often. The interpersonal role, which was one of my favorites, if you remember before I just, here's your assignment and let me tell you why you need to know about management, you and I went through an exchange where we got to know each other a little bit. We asked each other some questions. We just looked at each other as two human beings in the same environment trying to get better. And that hopefully created a bond between us, which is a form of an interpersonal role. And then to extend those interpersonal roles, there's a figurehead role as a manager. So if it wouldn't be you, because I would be the figurehead. So that would be the managerial role of figurehead. And of course, leader, this is what we talked about before of trying to inspire and encourage. And then the liaison is, all right, you told me that, I confirmed it with the dean. Then the dean gave me some information. I gave it back to my department chair head. So I was playing the liaison between the dean and my department head and you. So that's sort of, I'm getting information here and I'm giving information over here. That's a part of the interpersonal role. The last one, informational, this is really important. You need to monitor, how is my company doing? How is my team doing? What's the score? I need to monitor that. And then once I get that information and I'm monitoring it, I need to say, when a disseminator means I'm taking the information and I'm making sense of it. All right, I have 25 data points, and now I need to look at this information and actually make sense of it. What was the actual score? Was it an 89 or a 91? And then I need to do something with it. So that's sort of informational. Spokesperson is more informational as well. We have to launch a national advertising campaign to promote new goods and services, give a speech to inform the local community about the organization's future intentions. The one last thing I want to say about the roles that a manager plays, and hopefully you can see how those roles differ and why those roles are important. It's very important as a manager that we understand that when we're a figurehead, when we're a spokesperson, and when we're playing a liaison role, we are not just ourselves. We're not just managing what we say and how we act. We're representing an entire organization, that our company is being represented by us. So sometimes we have to put our own personal biases and our own personal attitudes aside so that we can do a good job honoring the company that we represent. So let's just say, if I was to give you an example, and I say Steve Jobs, and if I say, what does Steve Jobs represent? You would say, well, Apple. So Steve Jobs is very directly associated with the company he represents. So if I say Joe Biden, you think, okay, wow, he's the president of the United States. It's not just Joe Biden and his family, it's the nation in which he represents. So that's important to understand when we think about these roles, is they're much more than just the individual manager. We're talking about how they represent that organization. Howard Schultz is the iconic, founder and CEO of Starbucks. So even if he's not currently the CEO, he might be the chairman. His story is unbelievable. So he wrote a great book that I read. So that's a great example. So Howard Schultz at the top, that would be a top manager. So a district manager probably has a couple stores under their leadership. So that's a great example. So how about a middle manager? Like somebody that reports to the district managers. Who do you think that would be in Starbucks? So the store manager, theoretically, because they're a middle manager, they report to the district manager, and they also manage the baristas and the cashier people in the store, correct? So a shift manager would be classified in the middle manager category because they report to, say, a district manager or a store manager, and they also have people who report to them. So that's sort of the essence of what that is. So perfect example, because Starbucks is a classic example to use when we talk about business practices and whatnot. So the first line managers are typically, like you said, shift managers. That's probably it. When you talk about maybe the lowest of the low, that when you first come in and work at Starbucks, they have you in the floors and sort of maybe stocking the shelves, and they might have you making the sandwiches or something like that, but they don't let you touch the coffee until you're trained, or whatever that looks like. If you look at that person that first came in, they have a progression to move up this hierarchy and eventually maybe a chance to become a first line manager, and then so on. So this is just a level of management. And I think that that's important to understand, that first line managers are still managers. And it's so important to apply, whether you're the CEO of the company or you're the shift manager. These subjects will resonate because they have to still have those decisional skills, the interpersonal skills. They have to have the informational skills in order to be effective as managers. Wouldn't you agree? Like the shift manager, let's just use a shift manager real quick. If the shift manager didn't have information about who's working on the shift and couldn't make a decision about whether or not come in on Friday or Saturday, wouldn't that be frustrating? Yeah, and then if the middle manager, which would be the store manager, wasn't capable of seeing that dysfunction in the shift manager, that would also be ineffective. So that middle manager has to have the information to know, hey, what's going on with that shift manager, and also be able to have the decisional role to say, hey, listen, shift manager, we need to make a decision about whether or not you're going to work here because it doesn't seem like you're understanding how this works. Top managers, typically, what happens with top managers is they implement goals and strategy of the company. So depending on your philosophy and top management, but typically what happens is they plan and they organize. And a lot of times they obviously plan, organize, lead, and control. But the point is they do a lot of planning and organizing, which is the goal setting and the strategy. And that's what top managers tend to do, a lot of that. If you think about it, and I love using this example, this is why top management is interesting. But if you look at Netflix and you look at Disney Plus, and how they compete with one another, you can take a top manager, a CEO from Disney Plus, and you could put them over at Netflix. Even though they know nothing about any of the shows on Netflix, they've never worked in the format of Netflix, they could probably be effective because they understand what it's like to manage a large company with streaming video. So, and vice versa, if you take the CEO from Netflix and you put them over at Disney, they may know none of about the history of Disney, but because they're good planners, because they're good organizers, they can still be effective. And this is where we get into this conceptual skill, human skills, and technical skills. Conceptual skills, top managers have to have good conceptual skills. And conceptual skills is the ability to analyze and diagnose a situation and distinguish between cause and effect. How conceptual thinking is different than technical skills. So conceptual skills versus technical skills is what we're going to use in this example. So conceptually, you have been tasked with eliminating everybody there's a hunger issue in the world, and every day people are hungry. Your goal is to have zero hunger all over the world. So conceptually, what you would think about is, okay, if I'm going to do that, where should I go first in order to start implementing these hunger practices? So that would be a conceptual thought process, if you're following me. So it's like, all right, I have this big goal. Now, how do I think about the big picture of this goal? So that's a conceptual thinking process versus if you had that same goal and you literally took a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and you made the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you're really good at the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and you gave it to the guy who was hungry and they ate it. That is like a technical skill. You figured out how to make really good peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and you technically were the one providing that sandwich operationally to the person on the street. Do you see the difference between conceptual and technical? So a little bit of that is operational as well. So operational is the person going out and actually doing it. But I'll give you a quick one that maybe might resonate a little bit more. And I think it's important if you think about conceptual thinking, because it's one of the reasons is that you can think about things conceptually. It's really the difference between, okay, so I'll put it in context. You have a really, really good, let's see if I can, a programmer, a coder, somebody that can create code and they can design a software for you to just sit back and relax and ace this class without even showing up. And that's really valuable. And that person can do that. But that programmer, that really, really good programmer, does not have any idea as to how he can commercialize it, how he can sell it. He just knows how to make it. So if you asked him to figure out a way to distribute this awesome tool to students so they don't have to do as much work, he'd have no idea how to do it. He just knows how to sit in front of a computer, click the buttons. So he has the technical skills to do something, but you, because you're an unbelievable manager and you have conceptual thinking, you say, hey, Mr. Programmer Man, I would love for you to help, maybe I can pay you for the rights or the licensing of this technology. And conceptually, you'd start selling it all over the world and make $1 billion and retire wherever you want to retire. So that's helping understand why technical skills are really important, but then also how do we use those technical skills strategically to do things with them. So that's how a manager needs to think. If a manager didn't have any technical skills, like that Netflix Disney example, they would still be okay. You can come in and you could learn about the Disney characters and still be okay. But the problem is if managers had technical skills, I guess this is like Steve Jobs, it helps them be a little bit more effective as a manager. So technical skills are good, but not nearly as important for managers. Human skills, we talked about this before, the ability to understand, alter, lead, and control the behavior of other individuals and groups. This is really important for managers to have human skills. A CEO of the organization, top managers, middle managers, and first-line managers each have different levels of these skills. So let me just look at this real quick. If you're a first-line manager, it's probably important that you have good technical skills, and it's probably most important that you have good technical skills. And then it would be second most important for you to have good human skills to be able to talk to people. It's not as important that you have high conceptual skills. As a middle manager, the technical skills get a little bit lower. The human skills are really high. You have to have human skills as a middle manager. It's almost vital for the success of your job. And technical skills can be a little bit lower. And conceptual skills have to be a little bit higher. You have to start thinking out of the box. Top managers, without a doubt, conceptual skills are the most important. The second most important is human skills. And the third most important are technical skills. Once you get up to the CEO position, like I mentioned, you could have almost no technical skills, but if you're really good at conceptual and you're decent at human, you can be very successful. So I just wanted to kind of highlight those things. This is the concept of empowerment and self-managed teams. So let's talk about empowerment just for a second. If I was to empower you to design your own test and trust you that you're going to do a really good job designing a test that's going to test you, how would that make you feel if I said, hey, go ahead and design your test? How would that make you feel? I was to empower you, which is essentially giving power to somebody. Typically, that somebody I give power to feels a sense of worth, a sense of control, a sense of autonomy is the word that a lot of times people use. And it could be a very good thing. If you weren't ethically a good person and I was to empower you in a similar format, it may not be a good thing. At times, managers need to play this delicate dance of who do I empower versus who should I probably not empower because they haven't really demonstrated their trustworthiness yet. So this is a fun tool as managers, and we'll talk about it a lot, as to why we empower people, why it's important for the organization and to achieve our goals, and why we don't empower certain people. And it depends on the industry, it depends on the job, it depends on the level of trust you've built with some of the subordinates. Challenges for management in a global environment. Managing is not easy. And I stand up when I'm talking about this, because even talking about the subject of management, there's a lot to it. But the reality is it's a process, so we can follow it. And also the other thing is it's a little bit of an art and it's a little bit of a science, and we can learn how to get good at it. But what's really hard in management is building something called a competitive advantage. Let's go back to the Starbucks example. I'm assuming that some stores were better than other stores, meaning they were just managed more effectively. The manager had a better team, and maybe they had a bigger, newer store, which created, if they were competing against each other, which created a competitive advantage. They had a better deal, a better product, and were serving customers better than the smaller store, not as talented of a team, and a manager with less experience. So that's what managers are meant to do. They're meant to build competitive advantages in a diverse world with significant tools like artificial intelligence, information technology, and all of these other things. So it's a difficult task. And then we're meant to maintain ethical and socially responsible standards. I'd ask you what that is, but that's a big question, or that's a big statement. How do managers create a competitive advantage and at the same time maintain ethical, socially responsible standards and manage a diverse workforce? So you have a 18-year-old female here, and you have a 62-year-old male over here, and the 18-year-old female just came into the company, and they are just like everyone else. They're a staff member that works on your team. Are you going to be able to manage them the same way that you're managing a 62-year-old man that's been there for 20 years? It's just a challenge, as a manager. And of course, utilizing new technology. As you can tell, technology is changing all the time. I'm literally standing in my home office teaching you with a wireless headset. This would not have been able to happen how many years ago? So the question is, how are managers leveraging technology? And then, of course, practicing global crisis management. So we'll have a whole chapter on what it means, this global environment and all of these different challenges that, I can work with a person right now in South Africa that can edit a book that I'm working on. That's crazy. So that person in South Africa is competing against local publishers. So how do managers figure that out, and how do they manage in such an environment? We'll talk about globalization, which is a big subject. A lot of times innovation, which let me just test to see if you're following. What is innovation? If you were to define innovation, how would you define it? You said adapt. That's a big one. You said evolve. You said product. I mean, these are all big, amazing words. So innovation is the process of creating new, which is essentially evolving or adapting, or improved goods and services, or developing better ways to produce or provide them. I'll do just a quick example. This thing, I don't know if you can see it or not, is a jug of water. A person that's creative says, hey, there's got to be a new way, a novel way that we can drink water. Let's think about this new way. Why would we drink from a cup? Because you can spill a cup. You need to put a lid on it. Just creating something new in my mind. And then once you have a thought, okay, turn that thought into an actual product that you see here. That's innovation. That's an invention. That's doing something new and actually making it, like putting it into action. So now you see this. And then the next question when you think about entrepreneurship and business is, how do we take innovations and how do we use them within our organization to become better? Like how do we commercialize this particular product? How do we, if we have ChatGPT, how are we innovating with ChatGPT? How are we using ChatGPT to talk to our customers and do other things? So innovation is a big word that's being used a lot, and you hit it spot on, and we'll talk more about that later on. When you think about anything and when you want to learn about something, looking back and seeing, where did this come from? What's the history of this thing? I'm assuming you have a car, and let's just say, what kind of car do you have? Like, what's the make? Ford? Is it Honda? Is it Tesla? She's a Tesla. Okay, awesome. So if you think about the Tesla brand, everybody knows, or at least people want to know, what's the history of this particular car? Like, when did this car start being made, and why was it made? And why is that important for me now as a consumer to understand the history of this car? And just like anything else, the history of our nation, the history of people, the stories about what was shared when we were in our family and our legacy, we want to understand the history. So the same thing applies with management. In order to think about how we can be better managers, it's really important to understand, where did this thing like management come from? One of the best examples I like to use as to why business was created to begin with, to kind of look far, far back, is if you were living, let's say 1,000 years ago, and you had a village that you and your mom and all your friends lived in, and your village was really, really good at making tomato soup. So you were the village that was just amazing at making tomato soup. You did it really well. You had local tomatoes all around you. You did a great job making tomato soup, and you lived in this village, and life was good, but it wasn't great, and tomato soup was really good. And then this other village, let's say 200 miles away, was amazing at making bread. They just had the most amazing bread. And one day, one person decided to venture out of the village, and then the other person decided to venture out of the village, and they looked at each other, and one person brought the tomato soup, and the other person brought the tomato soup, brought the bread, and they did something called an exchange. They said, hey, listen, I'll give you 15 pounds of tomato soup if you give me 15 pounds of bread. And they said, let's do it, because we don't have any bread in our village, and this other village over here doesn't have any tomato soup. So they created something called an exchange. That is the essence of starting the concept of business, is this exchange concept. And with the exchange came farming, mass farming, came commercialization of certain areas, colonization, where villages started building around each other, and they started sharing school systems, and they started sharing waterways. And this is the beginning of what would be commercialization of the economic world. And then when we come to the United States in the 1890s, we begin something called the Industrial Revolution, where power, meaning like fuel power, the assembly lines, these big business concepts started becoming industrialized. And they started making them in the masses. They started creating lots and lots and lots of a singular product, and they started making the product at cheaper prices because of industrialization, because of fuel, because of electricity. There were other factors that went into it. And certainly the world wars played into it as well. So scientific management, administrative management, behavioral management, management science, and organizational environment theories these are just theories that people came up with way back in the day to sort of define, what is this management thing. Adam Smith found that the performance of the factories in which workers specialized, and when you think about specializing, so you're in Starbucks and you have a barista, and you have the person that maybe does the drive-through window versus the person who takes the orders at the front. So let's just say, I don't know how Starbucks runs, but let's say that the person at the drive-through window has been doing the drive-through window for 6 months, and they just crush it. They're so good because all they have to do is focus on one element of the business, the drive-through window, and the other person does the cashier, and they're really, really good at it because they've been doing it for 6 months. That's specialization. And the theory that Adam Smith says is that if you get people to specialize, productivity and performance increases. So don't let them do so many different roles. Have them specialize, productivity increases. Time is one metric of performance, and what that time measure is the manager's ability to monitor performance by simply saying, okay, how much time did it take? Now take that and then look at it from the frontline worker's perspective. So the person, possibly you, that's completing the task. Do you want to do the same task over and over and over and over again? We'll just use that to kind of talk through some of these points together, and I'll show you a little bit about, from a manager's perspective, and then maybe from a frontline perspective, why this has changed and why it's still very much relevant. Imagine yourself on a factory line of a sugar manufacturing plant, and you're taking a piece of, or let's just say a package of sugar all day for 12 hours a day, and you're taking a package of sugar and you're putting it in a box. taking a package of sugar, put it in a box, taking a package of sugar, put it in a box. Eventually, you're going to be really good at taking that package of sugar and putting it in a box, and you're going to do it really effectively. But the reality is, from the humanistic side of it, it limits a human from exploring other aspects of the production line. And it also sort of mechanizes and has a human being a unit of production. And that, you can see a little bit of that thinking in Starbucks, but obviously you're doing a little bit, or whoever was running the Starbucks a little bit more. But you can see how that's important, because it is specializing in the task is important. Creating a means of getting good at something so that you can produce it at a better speed, like efficiency, is good. But there's more to it than that. At least this is what management theorists have said, is that it's not just about the science. It's not just about the productivity. It's about more than that. So that's kind of how, if we go back to this chart, I'm not sure if you can see it, that's how behavioral management theory came about, how management science theory came about, and then we're talking about organizational environment theory. Problems with scientific management. Many workers experiencing the reorganized work system found that as their performance increased, managers required that they do more work for the same pay. Scientific management brought many workers more hardship than gain, and a distrust of managers who did not seem to care about workers' well-being. So these were the problems with scientific management. There's a guy named Frederick Taylor, who is sort of the father of scientific management, who, like Henry Ford and the assembly lines, Bethlehem Steel, he really helped these big industries become units of production. And again, even today, you see a lot of that happening within certain organizations, but it's moving more towards what would be, let's move away from administrative management to a behavioral management theory. So if we move out of scientific management and administrative management, the classic model of management, and we move more towards behavioral management, the question is, which is better? And the answer to the question is, it depends. It depends on the manager, it depends on the organizational goals, and it depends on the context in which we're working. But what I want to make sure you understand is that the classic approach to management, scientific management, units of production, and the assembly line worker and the Industrial Revolution brought about the practice of management. These people like Frederick Taylor and others have created a subject matter called management. And since then, management has been changing, and management has been challenged as to why do we do these things. And we're still at this crossroads of understanding why we do certain things. But they were the founding fathers of it. They were the originators right around that time of the Industrial Revolution.
Theory X management. Theory X managers are managers who do not trust their employees because they believe most individuals to be lazy and untrustworthy and dislike work. Therefore, they need to be motivated to work. Theory X managers have a difficult time trusting their employees.
Would you respond well to that management style?
Theory Y management. Theory Y managers believe most people are very motivated on their own and will trust employees.
There's a lot to talk about with that, but I want to just make sure you see the difference between the different management styles, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. So let me just pull up the Theory Y and Theory X managers real quick. Okay, so Theory X was the one that you didn't like. And Theory X basically says that people inherently don't want to work, that they're lazy, they dislike work, and they will do anything they want to not work. And so Theory X resonates with the employee, but it also resonates with the manager. This is what the manager thinks about their employees. And then the Theory Y manager assumes workers are not inherently lazy, they do not naturally dislike work, and they will do what is good for the organization. So they believe in their employees. So let me ask, what do you see are some flaws in the Theory Y? Let's go over here. First of all, isn't that messed up? That you have this great manager who believes in the employee, and the employee takes advantage of that. Now, Theory X is, look at it from the employee's perspective. Isn't it messed up to have a manager treat you like that? So here's the dynamic, and this is why management is an art and a science, is that now that you know the science behind this, and this guy McGregor sort of made these theories popular, but there's a lot of substantiality behind these. We have to know the context in which we're managing. which means that sometimes as managers, I'll use myself as an example. If I'm managing my company and the company that we have is in the pool industry, so we have pool technicians. And if you're imagining the pool technicians, if I meet a pool technician for the first time, we just hired him, he's onboarded, and I meet him for the first time, there's an element of my management that has to almost be theory X, in a sense of like, hey, there's some rules, you sort of have to prove yourself before you can move into this theory Y zone. So, but if I have a staff member or a pool tech that has been working there for 6 years, never has any issues, develops relationships with their customers, and has very little complaints over those 6 years, and I manage that person like a theory X manager, that employee would leave. So the goal is to match the style in which you're approaching the situation within context. So knowing we can't be naive or ignorant to the fact that this employee could potentially take advantage of us if we just give them all the freedom and all the autonomy, or at the same time, we can't be overbearing on them and draw them away. So we have to figure out a balance. And certainly if you think about industries, if you think about the hospital employs doctors, medical doctors who are heart surgeons, you probably don't need to treat them like theory X managers. They're probably pretty motivated to perform heart surgery, versus if you're managing the same hospital as the CEO and you have janitor staff or say security staff who are making minimum wage or not that much, that their retention, they turn over a lot, they have issues, you might have to have a little bit more theory X hands-on mentality in those situations. So there's a lot there, and we'll talk more about that as that goes on. But the point of me wanting to apply that is as these progressive history from scientific management and the Industrial Revolution to productivity to this what is it called, the conveyor belt mentality, the line mentality where people are just units of production. Now we're moving more towards behavioral management, which is to study how managers should behave to motivate employees and encourage them to perform at high levels and to be committed to the achievement of organizational goals. So this is getting into one of those objectives about motivation. How do we motivate people? And how we act as managers matters. It makes a difference how we act because our staff members, our subordinates, are affected by our behavior. This thing called contingency theory, and it kind of spins off of what we were talking about before. There's a guy named, last name Fiedler. I don't know if they quoted him here. Let me see if I could take a step back for a second and get out of my academic brain and just get into my practical brain. And for a long, long time, the President of the United States, it was thought that the President of the United States needed to have certain skills, certain competencies in order to be a good president. And they needed to be charismatic, and they needed to have a college degree, and they needed all these, let's check the box. Management theorists and leadership theorists have completely debunked that. And what is happening now is that the best leaders are the leaders that are capable of adjusting the way they lead depending on the context. So right now, I'm talking to you a little bit different, and I'm trying to engage you differently because it's a different context. My ability to lead you and manage you through this course material changes based on, it's contingent upon the context. If we were in person, I'd be sitting down at the table with you. We'd be looking at the slides together. I'd be looking over at you, asking, hey, did you get that? I would change the way I lead and manage based on the context. So my leadership is contingent upon the situation, which totally debunks the fact that I need to have a degree or I need to be charismatic. It's more about our ability, and you used that word great before, to adapt and to adjust our styles based on who we're managing and where we're managing them. So that's what the contingency theory is. And this is important to understand. Okay, we went from the scientific management and classic management with the Industrial Revolution. Then we moved more towards behavioral management. Okay, how does the manager behave? And theory Y and theory X. And now we're at this thing called, okay, now it all depends on how we adapt our style to the situation and the person. And this is now the theory that a lot of leaders and managers go by is this contingency theory. Characteristics of the environment determine the design of the organization structure and control systems, then determine the organization as stable environments, choose mechanistic structures, authority, vertical communication flows, control through strict rules and procedures, or organization is changing environments, choose an organic structure, decentralized authority, horizontal communication flows, cross-departmental cooperation. We'll go into some of those definitions later as we talk about organizational design. So just to kind of wrap it up, management is about planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. Management is everywhere, and everything that we do, you're managing the move that you're doing right now from one place to the other. You're managing your ability to communicate effectively with your teacher while you're in the middle of that move. You're contingent upon your situation. As you start to unravel this content and read this book, and as we start learning together, you'll be able to separate out these different tasks, and you're going to get better at it, more effective and more efficient, because you're going to understand exactly what you're doing and to be able to apply some of these tools and apply some of the things that we'll learn in this class to your everyday life. So management matters. Becoming a good manager is important. Managers have control over resources, and their goal is to achieve organizational objectives and to do it efficiently and effectively. That's sort of the essence of management. And then we move to the history of management. Why is it important to understand where it came from? Well, exchange. Remember the tomato soup and the bread. Hey, we got bread. We were really good at making bread. And hey, we're really good at making tomato soup. We should get together and hang out and exchange our stuff. And then all of a sudden, boom, industrial farming. Major colonies were starting to be built. Then you have the United States, and you have machine power and assembly lines. Now you're making things in the masses, and we're in a whole new era now with artificial intelligence, and it just keeps changing. So it's important as managers that we understand contextually, contingency model-wise, that we have to start adapting to these changes. So that's where the history came from, and here's where we are today. I'm really grateful to be able to teach you this subject matter. Over time, I'm more than open to feedback if there's things that you enjoyed or there's ways in which you were learning better than others.
Thanks for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you're looking for some more content, you can subscribe at the Dr. Claude Kershner Show on YouTube, or check out our new book, Deemed Essential: Finding Greatness Through the Business of Serving Others. And you could purchase that book at deemedessential.org. God bless.